Welcome to another episode of the Saturday Morning Snap Fantasy Football Podcast, the show that brings you weekly advice and news at the beginning of every weekend. Introducing first your hosts, Mac, Mark, and Landon. Oh my goodness, the draft is done, the players have landed, and we're here to talk about it all. Welcome into the Saturday Morning Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. It is Saturday, May 4th. May the Force be with you. We are talking rookie wide receivers today, giving you our post-draft thoughts. It's episode 51, and wherever you are and however you may be listening, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for making us a part of your day. I got Mark here with me. Landon is exploring, parts of Europe, backpacking, doing some bougie things, as we probably suspect.
Or
we
so
have
he
in report.
says.
Well, hey, the Instagram says otherwise. But we have in his place Scott, a new member from our show. He's going to be doing some content with us throughout the season, some waiver wire shows, some Patreon special shows. So, Scott, welcome in. Welcome to the team, sir. And excited to have you with us to talk some rookie wide receiver rankings.
What's up, gentlemen? It is truly a pleasure and an honor to join you guys here on the Saturday Morning Snap.
You're welcome.
Scott, it's an honor to have you, man. Jeez. Like, for the listeners out there, Scott is as much of a piece of this glorious friendship that I have with Landon as anyone else in this world. We go way back since, what was it?
Way back, playback.
Maybe SK or grade 1. And it was probably the collective decision when we were about 11 years old to become diehard football fans, and you jumped right on that boat with me, eh, Scotty?
Well, I did. It set us up for a glorious lifetime of fantasy football disappointments, championships, glory, utter defeats, and everything that comes with it. But really, the timeline for this goes back so far. I remember debating if Mike Alstott could work as a running back in fantasy. So I've got some memories, and think I can bring a different perspective to the game here.
That Mike Alstott's when you had to do fantasy points manually, correct?
That's right. You chiseled them onto a slab of beechwood.
I'll say one thing about Scott. He, despite his relentless tactics when he wins, he is so in your face. The sorest winner I have ever met in my life. I still have a soft spot for him. I love him dearly. So
we should have looked into his
guy
snack draft too. Scott was a member of the snack draft, if you can remember. This is before I was a part of the show.
Bow down to the emperor.
Always bow down to the emperor.
He did get the pick on the President's Choice potato chips, which I admitted were my favorite and still are.
Yeah.
Gotta get that sleeper pick.
Yeah.
Deep value there.
Yeah.
He's an industry. Hey, if you want to follow us on social, you can do so at Saturday Morning Snap on Instagram, and you can reach us on Twitter. I run the main account, SMS_fantasy on Twitter. We got Mark Draft _SMS, and Scott, where are you?
I can be found at the Scott _SMS.
Fantastic. Boys, we're going to jump into some news and notes before we start talking rookie wide receivers. Big news coming out earlier this week. Isaiah Crowell tore his Achilles on Monday for some team-related activities. This speaks to Josh Jacobs wholeheartedly. He skyrockets up rookie rankings, up redraft boards, and dynasty rankings. He skyrockets. So I know that the Raiders signed Doug Martin. We've seen what he can do in that offense. It hasn't been overwhelming or overly productive. So my question to you guys, with this news, not that Isaiah Crowell was a threat to Jacobs' workload anyways, but Josh Jacobs, would he be in a in a rookie draft for a dynasty league? Would he be the 101? Would you consider him there?
I believe he would be. and that would be in a half-point PPR. I think Jacobs is the guy for the 1.1. I'd imagine since that news today, I think he would have become 1.1 in a lot of mock drafts across the world. And the only real contestants, we're going to get into these guys later, but none of these guys are going to be a running back. There's no running back in the draft that ended up in the spot that Jacobs is sitting right now. He was claimed as a 3-down back by Mayock sometime last week, and it already looked good for him, but now things just seem to be looking a little brighter.
I'd have to agree with Mark there. I think a lot goes into the pick here, unless you're really reaching for something in a dynasty, like you really need a WR and you're set at the running back position, which is usually very few teams. I'd have to put him at 101. A lot's happening there in Oakland, and they're not the same team they were last year, I don't believe, with the addition of Antonio Brown, Tyrell Williams, and your $66 million tackle and Trent Brown. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there, and I think he's going to very quickly become the bell cow back.
Mm-hmm. If you didn't watch the draft, the Seattle Seahawks drafted DK Metcalf, combine superhero, with the 64th overall pick. Shortly after that, like seconds after, ESPN's Adam Schefter broke the news that, from an inside source, Doug Baldwin may have played his last down, considering retirement after having surgery on his groin and shoulder in the offseason. Not that Baldwin wants to give up the game, just physically might not be able to keep up. So a slide for DK Metcalf for sure, but considering the opportunity that lies ahead for Metcalf, do you adjust him in your rankings according?
I already liked the landing spot for him on the Seahawks, but I was kind of hoping that he would play a tertiary role where he could learn a lot from someone like Doug Baldwin. So I think this is kind of a bittersweet development if Doug Baldwin does in fact retire, because I really do like Baldwin. He's an excellent ball tracker, and he's been such a reliable target for Russell Wilson. It's not ideal, I don't think, for DK to just step in and assume his responsibilities, but it is a massive opportunity for him. I'll give him that. And his stock shoots right up. I would put him probably, in the top 2 or 3 guys.
Top 3?
To be honest.
Yeah. This is sort of what we talked about pre-draft, Mark, where we thought that even if Doug Baldwin was a part of this team, there was an opportunity for him to be successful. I mocked him to go to Seattle. You had sort of agreed it might be a good landing spot, and it came to fruition. But now we see that the opportunity really, as a wide receiver 2 on the team, besides Tyler Lockett, there might be a ton more opportunity than we thought. I will agree with you, though. It would have been nice to sort of learn under Baldwin's wing. I'm not sure he will retire, but he might still be a part of that team, so the mentorship could still be there. But that's uncertain at this time. Scott, what do you put your 2 cents on this one?
Yeah, that news actually pushed them up further on my board, because you're with Seattle. I found it was a great landing spot in the way that you have an elite quarterback who is in the prime of his career on one end, and then on the other side, it was a bit of a fight for receptions, and I don't think that's completely gone away. You got Moore, Lockett, but neither of those guys, I think, really are legitimate threats to be number ones right now. And if the hype is to be believed on Metcalf, he could become your, prototypical number 1 with his deep threat ability. And really, if you need,
I would be remiss.
I know Mac has his opinion on that. But I think that you can find mentorship with other athletes. You've got when you've got Wilson and whatnot. I'm not overly concerned about him learning. I'm sure he will, and I think this will just open up an opportunity for him to try to really prove that he can be the number 1 right out of the gate.
Last piece of news, we have Eagles exercise the 5th-year option on Carson Wentz. It's not surprising after seeing who they drafted to build around him. I think the future for the Eagles is invested in Carson Wentz, even with his offseason injuries and his health concerns. I think he is the guy they're building around. They pick up J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Miles Sanders out of Penn State, and a slew of other guys. So I think this team is building for the future. They're young. They have a lot of talent, a lot of promise, and I think we don't have to talk about that any further. I want to get right to the rookies.
Yeah,
rookie wide receivers.
What a perfect segue into the next section.
Oh my God. Okay, rookie wide receivers. The draft is over. People have landed. I'll just speak. I've seen a lot of articles, a lot of people saying that this was a weak rookie wide receiver class. This was a weak running back class. I will probably agree about the running backs, but I think this was actually a very deep wide receiver class. I think there's a lot of really good options. There are some players that I was really high on, really excited for, that just landed in bad spots. I think Marquise Brown jumps out as a guy that landed in Baltimore. I was really, really high on him, and now he's sort of slid down my rankings, probably 3 or 4 spots from where I probably had him pre-draft. So there's some guys that we'll talk about like that. To kick it off, we're just going to talk about top 10, and we've done a consensus ranking between Mac, Mark, Scott, and Landon from across the pond. So I think we're going to kick it off. Number 1, N'Keal Harry, drafted to the Patriots at the 32nd pick, the last pick of the first round. He is our consensus rank of 1.5, so pretty much 1. I had him at 2. So did Scott. Landon and Mark both have him at 1. Mark, give us your thoughts on N'Keal Harry as a wide receiver, what he represents for upside, why you think he's the best wide receiver in the class.
Well, I think fantasy-wise, he is on the perfect spot because, so many reasons. There are holes to fill in having lost Rob Gronkowski and Josh Gordon. So there's big holes to fill, big shoes to fill there in that offense. And Tom Brady is going to be throwing dimes to this guy. He is an amazing athlete. He is going to be the one to find that end zone and catch those balls. And then, it doesn't hurt that Tom Brady always happens to have so much extra time to find targets. N'Keal Harry is going to be that big guy that he will find in the end zone.
Usually when I'm looking at the Patriots, I am one of the people who try to look at it glass half empty. Tom Brady is amazing, the GOAT. No matter how much you may hate him, he comes through every year. But he is getting up there in age. And at a certain point, he does have to be human. And my rankings reflect the fact, I still put him at number 2. But to me, you need a good quarterback in his prime if you're looking at this from a dynasty perspective. And Tom Brady, maybe his elbow only has one more season, if that. And, if reality strikes, then you might be wondering, I don't know, maybe Jarrett Stidham's is, what you're left with. So if I have to look between Russell Wilson and an aging Tom Brady, I'm on, devil's advocate saying Tom Brady eventually will lose that elbow strength. And if it's not this season, it could be next season. And you might be kind of kicking yourself for going in on the GOAT at the end of his career instead of, say, a Russell Wilson in his prime, tossing that ball down the field.
Number 2, DK Metcalf landed with the Seahawks. Like we said, 64th overall pick. Back of the second round. He's our consensus number 2. I have him at 1. So does Scott. And Mark and Landon are a little bit off. Mark at 2, Landon at 4. We talked about DK a little bit already, but I sort of am with Scott in that he flew up my draft board the minute that I saw he got drafted to Seattle. And then the news on Doug Baldwin just sort of gives it that little bit push over the top. Scott, is there anything that you want to add to this before we move on to our third guy, or if we pretty much hit on all the points here?
think we hit most of the points. I will admit that Metcalf has a little bit of the kind of Tyler Lockett, Percy Harvin feel to him as a guy who, excels at straight line running.
Absolutely.
As someone who has owned both of those gentlemen in other leagues and currently owns one in our Dynasty league, there is a little bit of hesitation sometimes to see how they'll be able to run, the other routes at the NFL level, because sometimes the boom or bust play is unsustainable in a fantasy league.
Yep.
And that is my only real concern about this. But like I said, I think the landing spot's great. It's an elite quarterback, and no one has that wide receiver room in hand at this point. So week 4, he could have it.
The biggest knock on Metcalf is, his route tree is very limited. You're right. He really does excel at running straight line, speed type routes, utilizing his size to make catches, but not really too agile and shifty when it comes to change of pace and change of direction. So that's probably something that he's going to look to work on as he, works into being a pro. But I think this is a big boost for Russell Wilson, gives him another guy to throw to. I mean, David Moore wasn't impressing too many people last year. He'll supplant him very quickly. So I think Tyler Lockett gets a little bit of a boost. Russell Wilson gets no doubt a boost. And I think if DK Metcalf is going to be successful this year, fantasy-wise, it's going to happen in the red zone. That's probably his best chance to be productive. So I think this helps Seattle out, complemented with a run game. They could see a lot more red zone looks. And, I with the Baldwin news, I really, really like Metcalf. So, to be our number 2, probably a little bit higher than I anticipated him being. I probably saw him at the 3 or 4, but this Baldwin news and the Seattle landing spot just sort of escalated him a little bit further.
I'm gonna say something on behalf of myself and Landon a little bit here, because I noticed Landon has him.
Sure.
Landon has him lower at the 4th spot, and one thing that we can mention is that the Seattle Seahawks were the second most running team in the NFL last year, and you got to think they were dead last in passing attempts. So just that going forward, they were a run-first team, and especially when they established strength in a player like Chris Carson in the latter half of the season, you got to think they are going to continue to be a team that runs the clock and keeps the ball on the ground. So it's not like they are going to abandon that and all of a sudden start throwing deep bombs downfield just because they have DK Metcalf.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think when you look at Tyler Lockett, he had an unbelievably productive season, only caught 57 balls, almost reached 1,000 yards, but averaged 17 per reception, had 10 touchdowns. I mean, it felt like it was like every week the guy scored a touchdown.
That's true.
And so
but did you not feel like every week you were thinking, this is going to be Lockett's must week?
No, for sure. I'm just saying that Russell Wilson's not afraid to go deep. And if you give him another guy to go deep, it probably helps out. We also have seen that Seattle, when they get to the red zone, the goal line, they do like to throw the ball. It cost them a Super Bowl, but they do like to throw the ball in the red zone. So I don't know. I think, like I said, they represent touchdown upside. Not to say they're going to be slinging it down the field through the air, but certainly represent touchdown upside.
Very well.
AJ Brown comes in at number 3, and he's our first stop at the discrepancy on the discrepancy train. He landed with the Titans. Not the greatest landing spot for him. I think arguably he's one of the most talented wide receivers in the class. He lands at number 3. I have him at 3. So does Scott. Landon's the highest on AJ Brown at 2, and Mark is pulling AJ Brown down at number 8. So Mark, I'm going to flip it over to you. Make the case against AJ Brown, why you have him sunk in your top 10.
So I will admit that AJ Brown stepping onto the field week 1 could be a starter. He could be on the field for every snap. But it doesn't mean a lot to me on this run-first team. They started to establish at the end of the 2018 season. They made some progress, at least how to use Derrick Henry. And we saw some amazing performances out of him. And we didn't see amazing performances out of Marcus Mariota. So we hope they can, figure out how to keep the ground game active, because that was arguably their biggest highlight from last year. And then just to keep wide receivers relevant in that offense, it would be a big shift for them, and it would be a large adjustment from Mariota's current game and the confidence that he had in himself. So in my books, he does constitute a top 10 rookie, but
absolutely
barely for me.
Okay. All right. Scott, why don't you give us your perspective? You're in the same spot as me.
From my perspective on this one, I'm actually looking at the whole Titans team as a glass half full situation. I think Derrick Henry did have a bit of a coming out party last year, although it took him half a season to get there. And I think that if Mariota is healthy this season, you line up Corey Davis on one side, you've got A.J. Brown on the other, and the game plan around Derrick Henry, I think that'll give Mariota enough time to actually get off some half-decent passes, because I felt like last year he wasn't right. I mean, he's been hurt a lot of his career, unfortunately. But if it all comes together this year, I think there's definitely enough to go around. Davis is really the only, Delaney Walker, if he comes back from injuries, could become a target hog. But beyond that, I really do think that there is enough to feed A.J. Brown into kind of fantasy relevancy here. And I think long term, I think he's a really good pick, because we'll see what happens with Corey Davis. He's not a rookie anymore. And I think, there could be a battle brewing there. Mariota is still very talented. And if he comes through with a big year this year to rebound, Brown could be your number one wide receiver as early as next year if everything goes well.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be a little bit of a reach. Number 4 is Deebo Samuel, landed with the 49ers. He is probably the most consistently ranked between the four of us. We have him at 4.6, 4.6. So, coming in at the 4, Mark and Landon are both at 6. Scott and I are both at 4. I think Mark and I really talked about Deebo off mic here, and I think the main takeaways were that Deebo represents in a lineup that is just stocked with tons of offensive weapons. He represents a role that not many other guys can fill. I think when you look at Dante Pettis, he is the guy to own in this offense. George Kittle has his own role wrapped up in that tight end role. But outside of that, I mean, Marquise Goodwin is a down the field speed guy. Jalen Hurd is sort of the same type. And I think Deebo Samuel for this team is really going to represent like a possession guy, a yards after catch monster. He showed that in college, very physical, excellent at gaining yards after catch. He represents an Anquan Bolden like role for me. So that's kind of what Mark and I were talking about. Why don't you guys give us your perspective on Deebo really quick before we sort of stop? Because we are in the same neighborhood, so I don't think we have to spend too much time on him.
So he clearly adds to a very young and talented receiving core, with Jimmy G hopefully at the helm for the entirety of the season. I'm hoping that Deebo will be able to mimic Pettis' performance from 2018, and Pettis really blew up in the second half. Love his route running and his speed, but Deebo Samuel is more of just he's a strength guy, and you're right in saying that he doesn't equate to the other members of this receiving core. He's bigger, he uses his size to his advantage, and he has strength. Whereas there are other finesse pieces around him, including, someone we haven't really spoken about is Marquise Goodwin, who is a bit of an injury-prone guy. But again, when he gets an open field, he has lightning speed. So Deebo is kind of like a halfway point between their receivers and their tight ends. And I think he is totally a weapon that will be used wisely by Jimmy G.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, where Dante Pettis and Marquise Goodwin both represent speed and field stretchers, Jalen Hurd, I think, is buried in our rankings for that reason, because he fills that same type role and is kind of third in line, whereas Deebo represents a different role. So the opportunity for him is obviously a lot higher than Jalen Hurd, right? Number 5, we had Parris Campbell, similarly rated to Deebo Samuel, same consensus rank. We ranked Samuel a little bit higher just because of our consistency of his rank. I am actually pulling Parris Campbell down. I have him as 7 out of 10. You'd see that if you've been following our Instagram. We've been posting some of our individual top 10 picks. Scott and Mark will be sort of coming throughout the week as this episode drops. But Parris Campbell, Mark at 3, Scott and Landon at 5, and me at 7. He comes in at our number 5. So, Scott, give us sort of the middle of the road take on Parris Campbell. Then Mark, you can go, and I'll give my sort of devil's advocate perspective.
Well, really, for me, this one comes down to the quarterback. I think it's a fine landing spot. You have one of the elite wide receivers in the NFL to learn from. So, there are much worse places to land. You got Andrew Luck slinging the rock. I guess the only issue you will have there then is he doesn't come in and step in day one in a position where he has an opportunity to be the leading receiver really this season at all. Probably not next season. It would be kind of a longer dynasty type hold, in my opinion, just because T.Y. Hilton really has the hold on that team, and rightfully so. So that's why I ranked him kind of middle of the pack, because I think it's a great play. If he falls to you at a good position, it's probably a great hold for your future. I just don't think he'll be paying the immediate dividends that a few of the higher guys will, just based on the mouths to feed and the availability of Andrew Luck's throws.
Yeah, Mark,
I agree. Well put, Scotty. I think Parris Campbell could establish himself as the primary slot receiver on this team, with T.Y. Hilton and Devin Funchess on the boundaries. This passing attack is truly looking like a scary bunch of guys. And this is a fantastic landing spot, because I like to think of Indianapolis, at least for as long as I've been a fan, has been a revolving door of formidable receivers. You look at every number one receiver that they've had for the past 15 years has been grandfathered in by an excellent player at the position. T.Y. is the understudy of a Reggie Wayne. Reggie Wayne is the understudy of Marvin Harrison, and it's just, goes on. To me, Andrew Luck is the guy to make Parris Campbell a name in this league.
Mm-hmm. So my point here against Parris Campbell is not that he's not talented, because I think he is fantastic. I mean, pre-draft, he blew everyone away at the combine with his speed. And I think that his speed, people think that represents a downfield, deep guy. But I think he's better used across the intermediate parts of the field. He's really good change of direction guy. Like you said, slot guy. I just think when you factor in T.Y. Hilton, the acquisition of Devin Funchess, Chester Rogers had flashes last year. They have probably two of the better tight ends in football in Eric Ebron and Jack Doyle, who they utilize a lot. And then factor in the running back by committee of Marlon Mack, Naheem Hines, Jordan Wilkins, and now Spencer Ware being worked into the mix, which is ugly. I just think there's so many guys to get the ball into their hands that Parris Campbell, even though he's an elite level talent in this wide receiver class, I just think he's put in a spot where there's just too many other guys. And for that reason, although he's probably going to be really great for football, probably not that great for fantasy. So Parris Campbell's a guy that I really loved, but this landing spot for fantasy isn't great. For football, it's fantastic, but for fantasy, I think it's a little bit problematic. So that's why I have him a little bit lower than the rest of you guys.
Fair enough.
Yeah, well put.
This is my sort of bold take, and this is kind of out of nowhere, but I think the Colts represent the AFC in the Super Bowl.
I like that take.
Oh, that is bold.
Number 6, Marquise Brown. Hollywood Brown, the cousin of Antonio Brown, lands with the Ravens. He was the first wide receiver taken in the draft, and usually that type of receiver, the number 1 wide receiver, gets a lot of attention, gets a lot of opportunity in the rookie year, and I just don't think that that's going to happen for Marquise Brown. I have him at 5 in my rankings. That ranking's probably going to slip even further. And the position that I'm going to take on that is he's certainly probably top 3 talent. I think this is probably the worst spot he could have gone to. Lamar Jackson's shown trouble with accuracy. He had 6 games as a starter. He had more running attempts than passing attempts. So there's a lack of passing and volume in that offense. They picked up Mark Ingram. Their focus is on the ground. And even though they drafted 2 wide receivers that I think we really, as a group, really, really like, in Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin, I don't see things changing dramatically. And for that reason, I'm really fearful that Marquise Brown is going to be underwhelming as a rookie until Lamar Jackson can just figure this thing out, this quarterback thing.
Now, to talk about Lamar Jackson a little bit, I think everyone knows he is expected. The only way that his receivers are going to excel this year is if he improves his passing game. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone is kind of expecting him not to. But this, putting him at the number 4 spot, which is where I have him, is maybe a little bit of a hot take right now. But I do think that he will have improved in the offseason. I have faith in that Baltimore system, and the QB coaching there is solid. I think that he will have made tremendous leaps, and I think he'll seem a lot more confident in his arm, if he looked confident with his legs last season, I'm hoping that he becomes a more well-rounded player, and that's why I got him at the number 4. Bit of a fly, but it's maybe just something that I want to see.
Maybe. Scott, you represent the back end. I mean, are you on board with what I said about his landing spot? I mean, I could see my ranking of 5 slipping closer to yours at 8. So give us your perspective quickly.
Yeah, for me, he's a wide receiver I was very excited about, and the instant I saw him don the purple, he slid right down to number 8 there, and I was tempted to actually drop him a little bit lower. I'm I'm anti Mark's side about as much as you can be. As a ill-fated owner of Michael Crabtree last year, let me tell you, I watched every game that Lamar Jackson played in, and I just don't see it. I think he is an amazing athlete. I think he's going to be a successful quarterback in the league in the way that I think there's going to be wins. I think that he's going to break some records with his legs, barring a horrific injury, which always is possible when you're running that much. But his accuracy was it was painful to watch as a fantasy owner, and you can hope that he changes how he fundamentally plays the game and gets great coaching and starts hitting targets down the field. But I really think his best shot at actually producing for fantasy wide receivers is going to be, on broken plays, on checkdowns, when corners and safeties, linebackers, they're chasing him all over the field. And, a running back or a wide receiver manages to bust coverage, get a 8-yard check down and run it 70 yards. The thing is, that could be Hollywood, or it could be a running back, or it could be a tight end. I don't think his massive passing plays are predominantly going to be planned out down the field bombs. I think it's mostly going to be where he makes the defense miss as a whole. Someone gets open and they run it home, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be your drafted number 1 wide receiver. So due to that landing spot, and having watched him actually try to throw all last season, I just did not have enough optimism to even put him in my top 5. And unfortunately, I thought he was lucky to make it in my top 10 just purely based on his landing spot.
I think at a certain point, though,
he's putting up 140 week 1 against Miami. I'm saying it.
Put it on the board.
I think at a certain point, though, the talent has to outweigh the landing spot. I mean, he came in as a top 3 wide receiver prospect. And I think there is a little bit of opportunity there with Michael Crabtree and John Brown taking off in the offseason. Just out of, Michael Crabtree, probably the number 1 in Baltimore under Lamar Jackson. When he was in Oakland, averaged about, high 70s, if you factor in 85, 89, 58. So probably high 70 receptions, 850 yards, and 8.5 touchdowns per season in Oakland with Derek Carr. Comes over to Baltimore for 1 year, plays a full season, 16 games, 54 for 607 and 3. So a huge drop in production for him, and I think that's just due to a lack of passing. But there is an opportunity for Marquise Brown to find himself a spot in this offense. Hopefully, Lamar Jackson's commitment to improving his accuracy and his passing is sincere and genuine, but time will tell. Coming in at number 7, we have JJ Arcega-Whiteside, receiver out of Stanford. He landed with the Eagles, a guy that I really, really like. Landon likes the most, has him at number 3. I think that's really high for what he represents, and again, how loaded that Eagles offense is. I have him at 6, Mark and Scott at 9. Mark and Scott, why don't you give us your perspective on him at 9, and I'll try to sort of take Landon's point for the upside.
So he will be a little further down the depth chart behind 2 fairly good, albeit aging, wide receivers. And one argument here that I have to make in that kind of plays as a negative to Arcega-Whiteside is just that Wentz's passing attack might not favor the fact that JJ runs deep routes, and then while they are effective, they take longer to develop. And that was one of the areas of weakness for JJ, was just that while he does run solid, polished routes, it just takes him a little longer to make the cuts and for to get him to where he needs to be on the field.
Right.
So another argument is that Miles Sanders is starting off with this offense, and he's another rookie who could potentially steer the Eagles' offense towards a more run-heavy playbook.
So I have JJ. I've heard a funny nickname for him from Mike Wright, fantasy footballist. He's calling him JJ Arcega Genesis.
I mean, that's worth a draft pick right there.
It's fantastic. It's just for a team name, but it represents what he could be. And I have him at 6, middle of my top 10. Landon has him at 3, which I do think is really high. But I'm going to try my best. I haven't talked to Landon about his ranking of JJ, but I'm going to try to represent the upside that potentially lies for him. So it could be reference to the long term. I don't think that's why he has them there. I think maybe the news that I've seen some reports, some beat writers saying that the Eagles may be looking to trade Nelson Aguilar with the draft of JJ, because they do play similar roles. And another thing that we have to factor in is that in college, like you mentioned, Mark, JJ did run those downfield routes. He lined up outside and he ran downfield, and he was fairly successful at it with Stanford. But I think as he makes his transition to the pros, he's probably going to find himself in the slot, use his size, almost playing like a bigger wide receiver or a small tight end type role. Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert definitely in the mix for that type of role. But I think with Deshaun Jackson representing that downfield role and Alshon aging, there are certainly a lot of mouths to feed, but if they get rid of Aguilar, there is opportunity for JJ. So I just don't think at the pro level he has the speed or the polished routes to run it downfield at the same clip that Deshaun does. So I don't know. I think that JJ represents some opportunity. Like I said, there's too many mouths to feed for him to be ranked at 3, but I do think that long term he does represent some opportunity. So if Nelson Aguilar leaves, I think you might see him jump up your rankings a tiny bit, but probably not to 3. I think that's a stretch.
Sorry, Landon.
Yeah, Landon would be gritting his teeth right now, just defending JJ vehemently.
Listen, this is the penalty you pay when you don't bring your mic to London, to Europe. Like, we can trash you, we can talk all we want about your
Landon.
rankings. You can't defend yourself, Landon. So, man up and be prepared next time.
Call yourself a podcaster, eh, Landon? Didn't even bring your mic to Europe.
It's a hiking essential.
Talk about unprepared, uncommitted. It's pretty sad. Biggest discrepancy on our rankings, Mecole Hardman landed with the Chiefs. I've got him at 10. He is at the back of my top 10. Landon also shares a similar spot at number 8. Mark and Scott have him at 5 and 6. Do you want me to all over Mecole Hardman first, or would you like to build him up before I tear him down?
Can I say my nickname for him?
Please.
Mecole Hard Cash.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
I'd like to, based on that, I'd actually like to now put him at number 5 on the rankings.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Scott.
Go ahead.
Finally, a
Make
little bit
your
of
case.
recognition.
That's how I build my teams.
Okay, so, thanks to a seemingly godly quarterback in Kansas City, any receiver there do have a good shot at performing well when your quarterback is not even needing to look at you to facilitate a target. That if you're on the field with him, then, there's a chance that something magical is going to happen. So that's why Mecole, especially in the more recent news, in light of certain circumstances, he has become a more tantalizing option as a fantasy take. So he does have the highlight reel speed, which is not unfamiliar to someone like Tyreek Hill on that offense. Mm-hmm. But we all know of his ongoing criminal investigation. So that is clearly an asset that KC will be lacking, pending on what happens with that. That's why, for me, I'm kind of putting this as like a, if Tyreek Hill remains out of the picture, Mecole Hardman will have a role to play, and he will get the deep ball, just as Pat Mahomes knows how to throw.
Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll definitely jump in on this one, as this was one of my biggest discrepancies. And I'd say his landing spot is absolutely perfect for him and his skill set. That's why he's been rocketing up a lot of people's draft boards. Now, this is the opposite situation that I was discussing when it came to Hollywood Brown and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, because Hardman is a gadget player. He is a converted running back. And in an offense that is now down Tyreek Hill, and I unfortunately don't think that situation is going to get any better as all the news rolls out, there's going to be a lot of space for him to carve out a name for himself. And I really think that void that is left is primed for a player of his stature and ability to come in and, catch those 8-yard checkdowns, the 15-yard checkdowns, and turn them into something special. That's where Tyreek Hill did most of his damage, and I think that's why they were so interested in this type of player, because with the Lamar Jacksons, with the Patrick Mahomes, you have this ability to stretch the field, and you need somebody who can take broken plays, take those 5-yard receptions, 10-yard receptions, and turn them into absolute diamonds for fantasy owners. And I could really see that happening week in and week out this year. And I think if this guy hits, I think he could be one of the main reasons that you win your league. Now, obviously, that is a best case scenario, but that's what I'm saying. Bold prediction.
Funny enough, I think that Mecole Hardman could find himself in the legal spotlight as well. He does come to this team with a little bit of baggage. He has shown at times at Georgia some inappropriate social media behavior, spouting off a couple tweets with some homophobic or racial slurs. I do expect that he will address these comments upon being introduced to the team. I think he has a little bit of apologizing and making up to do before he puts on a Chiefs uniform. But like we said, par for the course, there always has to be a little bit of drama with their star players. I'm just not so sure that Mecole Hardman will be a star in Kansas City. Like Scott said, this was, I think, for a lot of people, the opposite of Hollywood Brown. Mecole Hardman wasn't even on people's radar, the pre-draft radar. We didn't even talk about him in our show, just for the fact that he was so underwhelming in college. 3 years at Georgia, secured 60 catches on a team that had Riley Ridley and Mecole Hardman, as well as Fromm, one of the best quarterbacks in next year's draft. This guy only caught 60 balls in 3 seasons. So yes, he is fast, 4.33 40. He can get down the field in a hurry. I think that with the Tyreek Hill investigation, the news that he will probably be suspended by the team, by the league, or banished on the commissioner's exempt list. I just think that the Kansas City Chiefs maybe overreacted and tried to find the perfect replacement for Tyreek Hill, but I'm not sure with a guy of that natural, freakish talent and ability can be replaced. And I think that maybe they just sort of overreacted and reached on a guy that probably doesn't deserve to be drafted in the second round. And like I said earlier, like Parris Campbell might have been a better fit, a better player in this offense. I don't think that Mecole Hardman, being given his lack of production and combine results, really warranted a second round pick. So I have my reservations about Mecole Hardman. I won't be taking him. I do think people are overreacting because how good his landing spot is, but I just think he wasn't on the pre-draft radar for a reason, and for that reason, I think I'm out.
I think last year, however, just like in every year, there's players that get drafted late. There's players that get drafted higher than we thought, and that show out with performances no matter what happens. Like, you can look at someone like Antonio Callaway from last year. Like, he went 105th. He may not have been on everyone's radar, but he still ended up the season on a surprising Browns team with a heck of a performance. Or even someone like Marcus Valdes-Scantling on Green Bay, who was drafted 174th last year, is whose radar would he have been on? But now he came out after securing 580 yards on 38 grabs. Like, those are great. Those are good numbers for a rookie, right? And he wasn't the only rookie from that team last year moving forward. So it's just, it's obviously none of these draft positions are really going to solidify anything until we see the way these teams come out in the first few weeks with their offensive game plans.
Mm-hmm. No, and the other part for me is that I do see regression coming for Patrick Mahomes. I don't think that there is another 5,000 yard, 50 touchdown season for Pat Mahomes. I think when you lose the running game like they did with Kareem Hunt, you lose an irreplaceable guy like Tyreek Hill. I think regression is just bound to happen. I think the biggest benefactor in this whole scenario with Tyreek Hill gone is probably Sammy Watkins. I mean, we forget with Mecole Hardman's draft position, we forget how good Sammy Watkins can be. So I think Hardman is behind Sammy Watkins. I think he is a huge bump. Kelsey probably loses out just a little bit for lack of red zone presence. He will certainly be a volume guy, but Watkins, I think, gets a boost. I don't know. I just don't see it with Hardman. I think it's just a total overreaction to his perfect landing spot.
All right.
Well, I think it's the big swing. If you're looking for a guy that, if everything plays out the way everyone wants it to, then you could have made a draft pick that can potentially win you a couple seasons. If it flames out, at least you took the home run swing. That's the type of situation I think you'll be drafting into.
Number 9, we've got Hakeem Butler. landed with the Cardinals, went a lot later than a lot of people thought. The first pick of the 4th round. I think the Cardinals had an excellent draft. I was surprised that they took Andy Isabella with their 2nd round pick. I don't know about you guys, but we do have Hakeem Butler really, really consistently ranked 8, 7, 7, 9. So makes sense he comes in at our 9th spot. So, I think Hakeem Butler's role in this offense is up for grabs. Larry Fitzgerald's still going to be there, a really good guy to learn from, be mentored by. I see personally Hakeem Butler just for his size and stature, catch radius. I see him translating to the pros a lot better. That's why I have him rated higher than Andy Isabella, even though they're close at 8 and 11 for me. I just see more of a role for him in the pros over Isabella. But when you factor in Kyler Murray, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, Hakeem Butler, Andy Isabella, I think this team could be a heck of a lot better offensively than they were last year with some new coaching pieces and offensive minds in there. So I'm excited for Hakeem Butler. I don't know why he slid as far as he did, but I do see him having a fairly decent rookie year.
I agree. There's a ton of weapons and new faces in Arizona. But I can't help but think this puts a little bit of pressure on young men. It's going to be a competition, I think, between Butler and Isabella to secure their role with that offensive program. And who knows what's going to be brought to the table with the new coaching and the new quarterback. Bottom line is, there's not enough certainty for me to have both these guys in the top 10, but if it's going to be one of them, I think it's Butler between the two.
Last guy, Kelvin Harmon, NC State wide receiver, landed with the Redskins. He is our number 10 overall. We do have him very consistently ranked once again. Me at 9, Mark at 11, outside his top 10. It's interesting to note, you do have McLaurin rated just above Kelvin Harmon. They are on the same team. So that's a talking point for sure. Scott and Landon both at 10. So again, in and around the same neighborhood. I'm going to let Mark sort of make a case for McLaurin over Harmon, but I do think that they are competing for this job.
So while a lot of years of Washington being a weak passing team, it makes me almost feel a little crazy to say that these guys are going to make an impact, but I do really love Dwayne Haskins and McLaurin. He looks like a dude that will be competing with Harmon, but I just think it's a bit of a coin toss right now because there's not too much competition out there. I think there's more action in the running back position on that team. But I do think that either one of these guys between Harmon and McLaurin could steal the spotlight as a WR1. And this could be the year that with Haskins at the helm, they could reestablish themselves as a bit of an air attack. And I do like both these guys for their longevity in dynasty picks, but I think it's going to be one or the other. And to me, Harmon stood out.
Okay. Scotty, what do you got to throw in on this one?
I don't have too much to add in on Harmon. I trust Mark's opinion on the Redskins. Lord knows he's been tracking them long enough. I think they both fall in a very similar category. It really it will come down for immediate impact to how quickly Haskins picks it up. And I personally think he was the steal of the draft, which I love the way it all played out. Well, we can talk about that when we're in our quarterback rankings. The NFC East is going to be lit twice a year, at least, for a long time. That being said, I think both of these guys have a shot at being contributors.
Yes.
I'm not going to pretend like the Redskins all of a sudden will become a passing powerhouse. You've got your Jordan Reed being kind of like dragged onto the field by a service dog, and who else? A couple prospects. I don't see it turning into some crazy powerful passing attack. But that being said, either of those guys could come out ahead because you want to talk about a receiving core that does not have a clear-cut number one. It's the
Yeah,
Redskins.
I mean, this receiving core is literally wide open. Okay, well, that's going to do it for us, guys. I'm excited to continue talking this. This was really, really good. Next week, we're going to tackle the rookie running backs, give you our top 10, consensus top 10 rank. We will continue to be without Landon, so if you liked having Scott on the show, you're going to get another dose of him next Saturday. But yeah, guys, this was a lot of fun. I really like talking these rookies. We do have our rookie draft for our Dynasty League coming up at the end of May. So hopefully we can get some, consensus rank for all rookies out if you're in a similar position as us. Make sure that you are following us on social. We are ramping up the off-season content on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and as well as Sleeper. So if you want to do some mock drafts, jump over to Sleeper. You can find us there. In the episode description, there is a link to our Sleeper channel. And with that being said, I think we can sign off for the three of us. Make sure you leave us a review if you've been listening for a while. If you're a new listener, hit that subscribe button. We'll jump into your pocket every single Saturday.
Happy Saturday, everybody.
Boys, have a fantastic weekend. Yeah, enjoy your Saturday, and we'll see the two of you back here next week.
Happy Saturday, everybody.
All right, boys, it's been a treat. We'll see ya. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Saturday Morning Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at SMS_fantasy. Support this independent podcast at patreon.com/SaturdayMorningSnap.